Hi, everyone. We're about to get started. Please go ahead and grab some coffee and take your seat.
Testing. Testing 1 2 3 4. Testing 1 2 3 4. Testing 1 2 3 4. Testing one. Great. Thank you. If everyone could get their breakfast and take a seat, please. Do you want to get out? They'll be gone by the time. For the last 3 days, yeah. Yeah. I know, right? I love you. You're so delightful. Rockefeller presents. It's your day. We all worked so hard for it. All right, everyone, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. I hope you're enjoying the breakfast and the coffee. Thank you so much for being here. Before we begin the conversation with one of my favorite secretaries of agriculture, I'm going to give a little bit of recap of what's happened. It's Food Day, everyone. Round of applause. Finally, Food Day at COP. And I want to thank the Sustainable Agriculture of the Americas Pavilion for hosting us and for being able to collaborate. This is really an honor to be here. I just want to talk about a few highlights. The global stocktake negotiations have moved behind doors, and according to our friends and colleagues at WWF, it seems to be very much business as usual, unfortunately, with little consensus on both food and agriculture or fossil fuels. So that's disappointing, but I think there is still hope, and we can, keep forging ahead, especially for next year and for 2030. Later today, the FAO will release its first of a three-part series of its global roadmap to 1.5 and zero hunger. And it's a first of its kind report, really mapping out investment strategies for food and agriculture that can really achieve the goals that we are talking about all week here and make sure that there's a roadmap for investors and the finance sector. And because it's Food Day, again, I'm so happy that it's finally Food Day at COP. There will be lots of different programming. You can go to foodtank.com to find out some of the events that we'll be involved in. But thank you all so much for being here today. And again, happy Food Day. Now I'm really excited to welcome Karen Ross, the Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture in the United States. She is such an expert on so many of the issues that have been discussed this week, and I'm so glad that you get to be here. You are. So please give her a round of applause. So, Secretary, I just want to jump right in, and if you can sort of give us a lay of the land of the state of food and agriculture in California, along with the climate crisis and how that's been affecting farmers and eaters.
Sure. So we're really proud of California agriculture because we're the #1 ag producing state in the country. Many people don't realize that. Even when I moved there 30 years ago, I'm like, I'm from Nebraska. You have beaches and movie stars. Do they have agriculture? Yeah, they kind of do. And what I love about our agriculture is how diverse it is, how bountiful it is. And because of the climate and the microclimates and the soils that we have, the infrastructure for delivering water, which is really important, and that's one of the ways we've most felt climate change. We're able to produce over 400 different crops. We have farmers from 2 acres that are all about selling organic to chefs in a city, to people who are multi-generational families that are shipping tree nuts and fruits and dairy products all around the world. So our value last year was almost $56 billion. That's just farm gate value without any added value. And we shipped about 100 in different countries, but we also are all about local. The vast majority of California farmers are less than 500 acres, and in fact, 70+% of our farmers are less than 100 acres. So many people lose that. They think about ag is big, and it is, but it's the cumulative impact of all of that. Challenges that we're facing, in addition to just coping with markets and changing consumer tastes, they're all weather, but they're really climate related. It's easy in farming to talk about the weather. And because I came out of the wine sector, we're very good at talking about vintage of this year compared to 1958. You can find people who have that in a notebook someplace. But we have seen our hotter, drier future play out. Since I've been secretary since 2011, I've lived through 2 historic droughts. And the last one was the one that I think really drove home what our future is like. We were heading into our 4th year of a drought. We had had a year where all of our predictive modeling said there's enough snow in the mountains to melt and put water into our reservoirs. There was no runoff. We lost over 800,000 acre-feet of runoff because the previous years had been so dry, but soil profile was so dry, there was no runoff. So you can imagine what that meant for ag, not having any of that water in the system, but what it meant for the forest and for nature, that's the kind of deficit that we've been running, which of course added to the wildfires that have impacted us tremendously. The other way we've really felt climate change already over the last decade, and it's just increasing at a fast rate, the introduction of invasive species, the longer lasting season of every generation is like the bugs love us a lot. And so just our pest management and having better tools, which for us is a shift towards more biologicals, but that pest impact is part of it. And then last year, how did we come out of a drought? The way all droughts end, floods. And this is atmospheric rivers are intense, intense storms, rainfall and snow. We were lucky, we got a lot of snow last year, but we also had massive rains. And fortunately, because we're better prepared for those types of situations than we've ever been, we have figured out recharging the groundwater basin is the only way for us to survive in the future. It's that below ground storage, above ground storage, using every drop as preciously as we possibly can, and recycling. So these are things that we're having, let alone extreme heat, which has definitely had an impact on crops like processing tomatoes and grapes and all the things that we love to grow. So I say we're living our future, and our future is happening now. And this is why it's so important that we all work together and think about how do we continue to nourish people in a changing climate. And status quo isn't going to do it. So I'm sorry to hear about status quo and the negotiations. Where are those people? I want to talk.
I want to talk to them too. Secretary, you mentioned that so many of the farms in California are 500 acres or less. And when we're thinking about the climate crisis, it's small scale and medium scale farmers who are affected all over the world the most by the effects of the climate crisis. Can you talk about what California farmers are doing to sort of build resilience? You mentioned organic and local. What are some other ways that California farmers are facing this challenge head on?
Yeah, so consolidation's already happening, and this just accelerates that kind of a process. And so for us, it's very important to focus on those people who don't have the same level of resources to withstand the shocks to the system. And so some of the things we've done as the state of California is really investing in climate smart agriculture. For us, that was aligned very closely to good old natural resource conservation service practices, but being tailored to California. So we have a healthy soils program. I always start with that because soil is the basis of everything. And healthy soils are something farmers care about and think about, but we want to invest in practices and scale them up. So our most popular practices are cover cropping, compost, hedgerows. We talk about hedgerows all the time because we want pollinators to be happy. No-till has not taken off to the same extent in California as it has in my home state of Nebraska, because we don't have thousands and thousands of contiguous acres of one or two crops. The diversity of our crops, the short season of our crops makes that a challenge for us, but it's very important that we think about in our almond orchards, for example, that we're not tilling that soil, that we're putting cover crops in there. These are things to build up resiliency, and then for us in California, healthy soils that continue to be productive, that are adding soil organic matter so that we get more water holding capacity in a state like California, hugely important. It's improving the nutrient cycling and the biodiversity. So many people, when we talk about biodiversity, and I was guilty of that until a few years ago, we think about the species and the bugs and those types of things. Below ground biodiversity can represent as much as of a third of the world's biodiversity. So when I saw the UN report on below ground biodiversity a few years ago, it's like, we need to do one of those for California. And guess what we have? And it was released in August. And Kate Scow, Dr. Kate Scow, who's one of the co-authors of the international report, was one of our co-authors. We're really pleased to have that, to use that to build upon our healthy soils practices. But the investment we've made in healthy soils is about $125 million to date. A minimum of 25% of our grants for the farmers, the direct to farmers, is going to socially disadvantaged, historically underserved farmers. We're also investing in demonstration projects and in technical assistance. We've built out a vast network, and we have a new cooperative agreement with NRCS, with our cooperative extension, and with our California Resource Conservation Districts, because someday we want to make sure that the capacity building and the technical assistance as new science, new technologies develop, that we've got throughout the state of California to be able to reach every farmer, regardless of what they're growing. Every acre will have access to the kinds of technical assistance that they need. That's a really important. We do on-farm water conservation. Our SWEEP program has over $200 million that's been invested, saving a tremendous amount of water and using energy better, so we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And because we're the #1 dairy state, and we're the state that has a mandate to reduce livestock emissions, methane emissions in particular. We have been led by our dairy sector to helping us achieve our 40% below 2013 greenhouse gas emission and methane reduction goals with dairy digesters, alternative manure management practices, which is connected to soil health because a lot of compost and other nutrient values for soil additives, and pollinator health are just a few of the programs that we're making that investment over $500 million in climate smart agriculture to help them. And one other thing, and I'm sorry for the long answer, except that thinking about investing on the farm is one part of it. Small farmers need markets. And so we have a very ambitious farm to school program to show that the power of procurement by our institutions is one key way of supporting local farmers, keeping those dollars working locally, improving nutrition for the kids. And ours also has a comprehensive experiential learning to connect children to nature, where food comes from, how to prepare it with culinary skills, and understanding climate change. So our first partner is a wonderful champion for this. It's like we have to think comprehensively. Only addressing one side of the equation may not be enough to really help de-risk farming, and thinking about procurement and how local markets are an important part of this for all the greenhouse gas emission yeah, and preserving farmland. Because we have studies that show if we can avoid development and urban sprawl, we're reducing vehicle miles traveled, and transportation is a huge contributor to climate change.
Thank you, Secretary.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry at all. I love
I
it.
get started and you can't shut me up.
I don't want to. You're making my job much easier. I want to go back to methane for a minute because California has done something very sort of unique in terms of having a plan, an international plan with subnational governments to tackle methane. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that.
Yeah, so this started before Glasgow, which was very important because at Glasgow it was the first time we had over 100 countries that signed an agreement to reduce methane emissions. California has a mandate in state law, SB 1383. It was passed in 2013. And fortunately, we've had the dollars to invest in that, to be partners with the industry in going towards this. I would say that's unique. We're not the only place doing it, but I think it's a great example of showing what is possible and what dairy digesters are doing, creating renewable energy. It can be for electricity. It has been for renewable natural gas. We're very hopeful in the future for all of you scientists out there. Hydrogen could be the next one because we really, these are all transition fuels.
Right.
How can we, but what's important about this, and Secretary Vilsack talks about this a lot, it's about solving a problem but creating additional market revenue streams as another way of keeping people in business. Milk is one product, and milk has many different elements to it. But how we manage the land, how we handle this waste, and I'm trying to get waste out of my vocabulary.
Sure.
It's a byproduct, and this one has multiple potential revenue streams and things to address other problems. So part of the circular economy, I mentioned compost, soil additives, things that could help reduce the cost of fertilizer so that we're not spending so much for synthetic fertilizer, which the disruptions in the supply chain the last couple of years has really turned up the interest there. But the new science and new technology can show us all the things that are possible.
Yeah, and those kinds of opportunities, along with science and technology, can really keep farmers on the land and attract young farmers who want to get into farming. And I think that's a big issue for California.
As it is globally, I've found out next generation talent and tools is really what we're focused on. And it's important for us to get out and talk to young people. And again, farm to school is another way. Farming's not just what you see or have heard of, especially for children of farm workers. Do they aspire to be a farm worker? No, but there's so many other ways to be involved in agriculture and being able to do the tech. 92% of Californians have a cell phone. 54%, 58% have a smartphone. They're equipped. They come out of the womb equipped to run the irrigation system, to track the farm, to be able to take be the operator of the drone or be the person who uses their agronomic skill to inform the laser weeding company this is how it has to be, and I'm going to stand at the end of the field where hopefully it's shaded in extreme heat. We have to think about, do we really want people out doing manual things when we could be utilizing their expertise, their abilities to understand plants and the land to better inform the technology that can hopefully help ease that burden and focus on not just for large-scale farms, but the appropriate scale technology for small farms. We have a Future of Food initiative in the Central Valley that's really focused on technology and easing the burden of those kinds of skills that will hopefully create a better pathway for enticing more farmers to come into the
Absolutely.
business.
And giving farm workers another chance to develop skills.
We call it ladder. Let's create ladders up so that you can take people that know this so
Right,
well
right.
and they love agriculture.
Right.
How do we make sure we don't lose that intellectual capacity from the food chain? How else can we do that? So I've done 11 ag tech sessions for the community colleges and Western growers
That's great.
as an introduction to all of the opportunities that are before us in agriculture and to have an impactful life of being part of growing nourishing food and getting it to people. Like young people, we all aspire for what is my purpose in life and to help people see I could be a part of that. Like I could get tears in my eyes just saying, who wouldn't want to be in agriculture? And it's really cool and exciting and it's tech and it's sexy, don't you think? Although I prefer to be on the eating side of the food chain.
Don't we all? Secretary Ross, I want to turn now to sort of the policy side and U.S. policy. The Farm Bill has been extended, but it has such a wide reach. It's not just for the United States. Can you talk about what you hope from the next Farm Bill in terms of fighting the climate crisis, coming up with solutions, developing those innovations and technologies that can really help farmers on the ground?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say on behalf of the state of California, we coordinate our position letter. And so it has Health and Human Services, EPA, Natural Resources, and the Department of Food and Agriculture. Job number one is protect the food safety net. The programs that we have for feeding people are not only critically important and the right thing to do, they also create economic activity, but mostly it's about feeding people. And so that has always been like number one priority. Conservation title is increasing in importance. It's always been important, but because of climate change and because of the new investments that we're making in these programs, critically important. For us, we'd love to see the research. Everybody talks research is really important, but who really makes that the number one cause to walk the halls of Congress?
Right.
And yet, we need those investments in research, that basic knowledge, and publicly funded research as the basis for building trust for the research
Bravo.
results
Yeah.
is absolutely critical. But it's not just the research that's happening in the labs and on the campuses, it's that extension, that translation of those lab findings, doing the trials. We'd love to see more real-time trials, helping to get to solutions faster. So research title is really important for us. Obviously, we also care deeply about having all market opportunities, and I think it's really important when we talk about trade. When I represent California and another country, and I'm sitting with their ag secretary saying, we're here to sell you stuff, that's not really going to resonate, right? I don't want to take markets away from anybody,
Right.
just as I don't want markets taken away from us. This is about understanding how do we fulfill the whole nutrition diet for people and fill gaps for one another. What are the trading mechanisms to allow us to do that? And anymore, it's not just about the food product itself. It's about the knowledge. It's about the varietals. It's about so many other things. So trade will continue to be important if we want to be able, and especially with the climate change, to fill the gaps of what's not being produced locally. And like, I love cashews, cocoa, and coffee. We don't grow very many of those
Right,
in California. I see many important gaps to be filled by having trading mechanisms that work and not displacing people and not creating environmental burdens in one country because they're sacrificing something to ship it to another.
Right. Secretary Ross, you've mentioned extension several times, which I think is so important because there are many states in the United States that are not investing as much in extension. Can you talk a little bit more about why that's so important to you?
Well, that having that credible source that understands the science but knows how to translate it and becomes a trusted voice for the local community of farmers. We know that that adoption rate is, there's always going to be those people who are the early champions, the early adopters, and others will be watching that and doing the demonstration projects we've talked about as one way of like rapidly scaling up. But it's doing the trial on the farm to say, this worked in another place. How do we adapt it for you? Or look, we proved that you can get better water holding capacity with doing these types of practices. So extension is hugely important. One of the things I've observed over the years, and I experienced this as president of California Wine Grape Growers, we've privatized a lot of that kind of transfer of knowledge. And so, pest control advisors, crop care advisors, agronomists are all in the business, but nothing replaces that kind of more public body, trusted resource, language and cultural communication skills to reach every farmer. And I think that's an obligation and an opportunity for public agencies to be able to deliver that and improve, hopefully, farming on the land and the lives of people. And so I just think that there's a hugely important role of the extension network. And while we might privatize it, it's still that knowledge base and the translation of it from our local communities is coming from the university system. And I think it should not be discounted and replaced.
Agreed. And that knowledge base and sharing that knowledge is especially important when we're talking about regenerative agriculture practices. And I know the California Department of Food and Agriculture has been running these listening sessions to really define what regenerative agriculture means for farmers, for eaters.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're hearing?
Yes. So first I'm going to say we're not trying to dictate to the world regenerative ag, but what we find is if you talk to 12 people, you get 12 definitions. And when some of my sister agencies, who I love dearly, we're starting to throw the words into a policy paper or into a bill or into trailer bill language. That was like, who should be defining this? We need to make sure that it's driven by farmers with input from everybody else in the system. So we're doing this for California policy purposes, and we're starting the listening session. Our first one was on the 6th. And most of those will be remote so that we can really broaden the opportunities for people to participate. We've been welcoming written comments for quite some time, but we started with a basis. Our environmental farming panel really conducted a literature review and provided for us a framework, and that is publicly available for many people to take a look at, to say this is a basis upon which it is. We believe it should be as inclusive as possible. It's not about, if this is such a great way of doing things, do we just want to reserve it for a few? So we're not talking certification programs for ourselves. That may be the desire of a farmer and their retailer buyer. That's not my business. That is a choice that has to be made as part of a business plan. But we want to make sure there's a good basis of understanding, and that when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we've created within my sister agencies in the state of California our pathway forward on that. We know that it will involve new science, new technology. We want more biological solutions, not only for nutrient management, but for our pest management and our sustainable pest management plan. So I think we're creating an opportunity to be very inclusive. I don't know what it's going to look like, Jen.
Sure. No, I can't wait to see what it looks like.
Soil will be the basis, but it can't leave people out.
Right. Soil and people first. Before we turn to questions, I'm wondering what your hopes are from this COP.
Well, stock taking is important, and I hope that we can really show and document progress that's been made. This is only my third COP, but it's already twice as many people as my first one in Glasgow. And this one's really spread out, and there's lots of food options. Did y'all notice that from So I think stock taking is important if it leads to action.
Right.
And I think building awareness and having more people involved is really important. But at some point, where do the action plans? Where do we see the investment? So we know from California's experience, we've been fortunate to have one-time dollars to invest. This transition is not cheap and it's not without risk.
Right.
But not doing it is more expensive and more risk. So I hope that people on a global basis feel this sense of urgency and that we find ways, even in small paths forward. I wish I could be more optimistic about what I'm hearing about food and ag. And I think part of it is it the complexity of it, or do people just go, no, of course we have to feed people, but we can't take that for granted in the
Right.
kind of climate change that we're feeling on a global basis. There's huge opportunities for new partnerships by traditional countries that we wouldn't normally think of as
Right.
partners.
Right.
So for us in California, our work with tribes, with landscape and the forests are critically important. Partnering with tribes on the health of salmon and rivers. So I think we have to think differently about who our partners are, and it's going to take partners of those who have the resources and those who may not have financial resources,
Right.
but they have knowledge resources to bring to the conversation.
Thank you so much. I want to open it up for questions from the audience.
Thank
If you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Tim Cruz with the Land Institute in Kansas. And
Hey.
good to see you. Thank you for this remarkable discussion. You mentioned California's efforts to improve soil organic carbon, addressing carbon and methane. But I'm wondering if there's any policy efforts towards nitrous oxide and the elephant in the room in terms of agriculture.
No, thank you for that, because quite truthfully, as far as an inventory for agriculture, if you're talking not specifically to agriculture, it has been at a level of the other ways that we're addressing climate change. That one hasn't been. But we also, through other programs for water and nitrogen use efficiency, we've been able to make significant strides in how we use fertilizer. We have regulations on irrigated ag lands to prevent the leaching of nitrates, because we have impacted our groundwater aquifers over time, but we no longer farm the way that we did over 50 years. We have leaching issues from 50 years ago that we're trying to address, but we're not adding loading to that because of our irrigated ag lands program and because of the dairy waste discharge permits and livestock permits that are required. So we're regulating it in different ways, not part of direct climate policy, and also because as an emissions factor, it's one of the lower ones that we have. But I'm very, very mindful of the issue on a global basis. Not a satisfactory answer, but I'm keenly aware of it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes, hi. My name is Letitia Amadiewu. I'm with a non-for-profit called Sea Change, formerly USC Canada, based in Ottawa, Canada.
Yeah.
We work in 11 countries. Our focus is on farmer-led seed systems. And my question is about, I wanted to know if you can elaborate maybe a little bit on the research aspect. A lot of agriculture research, of course, goes into conventional agriculture. Very little that's focused on farmer-led research, or even this idea of the expert, who is the expert and who is a knowledge holder, and how we understand those type of terminologies. So I wanted to, maybe if you can elaborate a little bit in terms of that shift, not only in terms of private research, but also on-farm, farmer-led research, and the importance of that in shifting policy legislations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. And I think because our systems in California and even in Nebraska, where I grew up, see, we have kindred spirit here. We're more mature, so ours has evolved. But and I kind of skipped over this when I talked about, we know the adoption rate, because that's a historical way of changing practices is you identify some that are going to be the leaders, and they're going to host a demonstration day. We have a farmer demonstration network that was established amongst our groups to really make sure that we're doing farmer to farmer transfer of knowledge. But when I talk about trials, like trials with real-time feedback from farmers, those are done. Sometimes it's just the farmers to farmers, but almost always there's somebody from Extension that's involved in that, so that they're doing the verification. They're collecting the data, so it's not just done and a handful of farmers know about it. It becomes part of shared knowledge for many others. So that's where a lot of our emphasis is. But I will tell you what we're more interested in right now is real-time feedback loops, that it's not just, sorry, this is not meant as a negative, it's not just Extension out running those trials, that the farmer is a part of that trial, giving real-time feedback so that it's getting into the system to improve anybody else who's working on that. When you're also talking about seed development.
Yeah, seeds, climate adapted seeds. 'Cause
Yes.
We talk a lot about
Yes.
farmers being, we talk a lot about climate being resilient, but I think a lot of time we don't talk about seed, climate adapted
Yeah.
seeds and the importance of that for farmers.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge key
That's the
piece
only way to
that's
get
lost.
Thank you for that, because I serve on a lot of advisory boards for universities, and there was a time where plant breeding was not the thing that people were going
Right.
into, and I feel like we lost a lot of time where that wasn't the place for a lot of young people, and now I'm shocked by how rapidly that's grown. And part of it is people who are interested in the science and the technology and the developments we've done. I will say, as a wheat grower in not in California, Nebraska, I got to make sure I don't have conflicts of interest. Okay, I was thrilled before I left for COP to see that a consortium, and this was led by a Cornell researcher, finally has a new, but they think very optimistically, as a new drought-tolerant wheat seed. Like, it's been years to get some of these new varietals. And for us in California, seed industry for vegetables, we have over 100 companies that are global companies that are developing the seed and doing the trials for California. I feel that that's going to come along faster than a grapevine or an almond tree. These things take a long time for us to do that, and that's where I'm very worried about our future, quite frankly. Have we been investing enough? Are we showing that as a priority enough for us to be able to give seeds that we know will help a farmer if they choose to plant it with precious water and composting or cover crops? Will this actually be able to survive with extreme heat, drought, or even their feet get wet and they're in flood part of
Right,
the year?
right.
So I would love to see even more emphasis put on that. And there are companies now in California that are doing stuff as companies. The new business model is, these are varietals that we've tested. We've captured the flavor, we've captured the nutrition, we've captured the resiliency, but they're going to be part of their intellectual property, which goes back to, why is it so important for publicly funded research to make sure that there's access for all? And this is where it's fine to privatize, but don't let that take away from the critical importance of publicly funded agricultural research.
Bravo. Thank you for that. We have time for one more question.
Mark Zorns from Winnow. We build technology that helps businesses around the world prevent food waste. You talked about SB 1383, and you talked about its impact for methane prevention sort of in dairy farms. I'm just curious, as legislation starts to kick in through CalRecycle around mandating food waste collection as well as donation, if you can expand a bit more on that and kind of what can be learned from that in the new Biden-Harris draft food waste regulation that just came out.
Yeah, and I haven't read that thoroughly. I'm just aware of it. And first of all, in California, a lot of what would be characterized as food waste is coming out of establishments that's going directly to dairy farms in particular, because a dairy cow is the #1 recycler. Almond hulls go there. And because we're a feed deficit state, actually those I hate to use the word waste, it's a byproduct,
Right.
but those waste streams are hugely important to our feed self-sufficiency. So we continue in California to focus on highest and best use, which is people to people. We also have a very, and started 20 years ago, partnership with the California Association of Food Banks to take food and get it into any time of the season where there's, and that's how we really increased fruits and vegetables and fresh produce and food boxes, is because of those partnerships. There's more that can be done on that. But we're really focused on circular economy and getting waste out of the system. And that's where, for us, composting is going to take a while. As sophisticated as our infrastructure is, it's not sophisticated enough for what we're really looking at in that regard. And I have great sympathy for my colleague, Rachel Wagner, who runs CalRecycle, in getting this. But if we don't start, then we're just delayed in getting it going. So it is a huge investment to be made. You have to build a lot of awareness to change the habits. Our urban areas are going to be earlier to that than our rural areas are, but we're on the pathway. I'm optimistic for California, and if people have new innovations to help us like accelerate that process, that'd be great. But a lot of it is human behavior.
Thank you, Secretary Ross. This has been a delightful conversation. Please give her a round of applause. I also want to thank all of you for your questions. I want to thank the Sustainable Agriculture of the Americas Pavilion and AICA for hosting us, especially Margaret Ziegler, who couldn't be with us this morning. She's at another panel. But this has just been a tremendous opportunity. I want to thank the tech team for just keeping us on track, and all of you again for being here. So thank you, and happy COP and happy Food Day.